Now is when you may want to wander into your bathroom, open the medicine cabinet, and pop a Dramamine because we are about to discuss Generation 3 heavily degraded copies, the time period from roughly 2011 to 2016. By 2010, we'd reached the point where bands were copying bands that were copying bands that had copied My Chemical Romance. The original DNA was barely recognizable, filtered through so many intermediary interpretations that what remained was often completely divorced from what made MCR compelling in the first place. This third generation coincided with some huge shifts in how young people discovered music. YouTube was becoming the primary discovery platform, which rewarded visual spectacle over musical sophistication. This third generation coincided with some major shifts in how young people discovered music. YouTube was becoming the primary discovery platform, which rewarded visual spectacle over musical sophistication. Tumblr was creating aesthetic-focused fan communities that also prioritized imagery over substance. And most importantly, many of the kids discovering these bands might not have ever had the opportunity to see My Chemical Romance perform live because the band decided to take a break in 2013. This meant that they were entering the ecosystem through copies rather than the original. That leads us to our first Generation 3 band, Motionless in White, the slasher film Misunderstanding. Motionless in White formed in Scranton, Pennsylvania in 2005, but didn't gain significant traction until 2010's Creatures. By then, they'd observed how bands like Black Veil Brides had turned MCR's gothic elements into pure visual spectacle and decided to push that approach even further into B-movie territory. Where MCR's darkness served the emotional content of their songs, Motionless in White used macabre imagery as pure aesthetic appropriation. Their 2012 album Infamous featured song titles like Devil's Night and Cinematic, spelled Sinematic, accompanied by music videos that looked more like low-budget slasher films than artistic statements. They knew enough that My Chem used dark imagery, so they went full monster movie, but there wasn't a connection between the imagery and the actual musical or emotional content. Musically, they represented the complete transformation of My Chem's template into generic metalcore. They took the quiet to loud dynamics that made songs like Helena so effective, but applied them to completely formulaic song structures. Every track followed the same pattern. Clean verse, screamed pre-chorus, anthemic chorus, breakdown, repeat. It was almost like theatrical metalcore by committee. Their attempts at concept albums, yes, they tried, showed that Motionless in White grasped that My Chem had created narrative coherence with the Black Parade, but they couldn't replicate the storytelling sophistication. Their 2014 release, Reincarnate, attempted to build mythology around death and rebirth themes, but without any genuine connection to personal experience or literary tradition. Again, this was another instance of monster movie tropes arranged into song structures. What I'm really trying to say here is that Motionless in White only captured surface level aggression. The genuine vulnerability that balanced My Chem's darkness, those moments in Give 'Em Hell Kid or The Ghost of You, where Gerard Way's voice cracked with genuine emotion, was completely absent. Motionless in White learned to simulate anger, but had no idea how to access or express authentic pain. Despite their formulaic approach, Motionless in White found their niche and have maintained it consistently. They continue touring and releasing albums that hit the same aesthetic and musical marks, serving an audience that wants exactly what they expect. I guess you could say they've become a reliable brand rather than an evolving artistic entity. Next up, Falling in Reverse, the emo boomerang. When Ronnie Radke was released from prison in 2010, he could have returned to escape the fate, or started something completely new. Instead, he formed Falling in Reverse, which became the ultimate example of how My Chem's template could be corrupted into pure self-promotion. I feel like Ronnie became a sort of emo boomerang, thrown out of the scene only to come spinning back with even more force. Falling in Reverse took everything problematic about Generation 2 and amplified it. Where Escape the Fate had been distracted by real life drama, Falling in Reverse was built entirely around Ronnie's persona and legal troubles. Their 2011 debut, The Drug in Me Is You, wasn't an artistic statement. It was a calculated attempt to turn personal controversy into commercial success. The visual presentation showed how completely the MCR aesthetic had been transformed. Where Gerard Way's theatrical elements served his artistic vision, Ronnie Radke's presentation was pure self-marketing. The tattoos, the makeup, the styling, everything seemed to be designed to reinforce his image as a cartoon villain version of himself rather than expressing genuine artistic ideas. Musically, they took Escape the Fate's already simplified approach and made it even more radio friendly and formulaic. Songs like Good Girls, Bad Guys, and I'm Not a Vampire showed they could write hooks, but the arrangements were completely predictable. They'd learned MCR's quiet to loud dynamics, but applied them without any understanding of how those dynamics served emotional storytelling. Lyrically, they represented the complete transformation of confessional songwriting into manufactured controversy. Where My Chem's personal revelations felt universal, Falling in Reverse's lyrics focused on personal vendettas and, wait for it, self-promotion. Songs became opportunities for Ronnie to settle scores or promote his personal mythology rather than exploring genuine human experiences. Their social media presence perfectly illustrated this approach too. Instead of their platform being used to discuss their artistic influences or how they felt about social issues, every post seemed to be designed to generate controversy or maintain Ronnie's personal mythology. They recognized that in the social media age, staying relevant meant staying controversial. Artistic authenticity was completely secondary to engagement metrics. Now, Falling in Reverse has maintained a surprisingly durable career built entirely on this foundation of manufactured drama and nostalgic familiarity. They continue releasing albums and touring, sustained more by Ronnie's persona than by any musical evolution or artistic growth. Okay, so before we dive into this particular cesspit, I need to be very clear. I think Blood on the Dance Floor is absolute trash, and giving them any airtime actually makes my skin crawl. But unfortunately, they're necessary to examine if we want to understand just how far the Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge apple tumbled from the tree and how thoroughly it rotted once it hit the ground. The last Generation 3 band we're going to discuss today is Blood on the Dance Floor, also known as the complete aesthetic collapse. If we needed proof that the photocopying process could completely destroy the original vision, Blood on the Dance Floor provided it. Formed in 2006 by Davy or Davi Vanity. I haven't even bothered to look up how to properly pronounce his name. I do know that it is insane that it's spelled Dahvie. But Mr. Vanity and various collaborators, they represented the final degradation of everything MCR had created. They took the hot topic aesthetic that had become associated with the scene and threw every possible element together without any artistic coherence. The visual presentation looked like someone had exploded at Rainbow Bright's garage sale. Hair like a troll doll, dramatic makeup, and elaborate outfits straight out of Twisted Sister's playbook, all combined without any understanding of how visual elements could serve artistic purpose. They replaced live instrumentation with cheap electronic elements, turning rock songs into dance tracks. They'd observed that MCR used synthesizers and electronic elements, but completely missed how those elements were integrated into sophisticated arrangements. Instead, they created what sounded like songs being played on a Fisher-Price laugh and learn silly sounds light up piano. Say that 3 times fast. Lyrically, they represented the complete absence of the literary sophistication that had made My Chem's Darkness feel meaningful. Instead of Gerard Way's references to literature, comic books, and genuine human struggle, blood on the dance floor offered juvenile shock value and manufactured edginess. They'd learned that controversy could generate attention, but had no understanding of how to transform controversy into art. Their career trajectory showed the ultimate endpoint of the photocopying process, in my opinion. By 2015, they were playing increasingly smaller venues to audiences that seemed more interested in the spectacle than the music. They captured all the surface elements of what had made MCR compelling, but in combining them without artistic vision or authentic experience, they'd created something that satisfied none of the needs the original had addressed. What's particularly telling is that despite accruing millions of music video views on YouTube, this digital success did nothing to validate what the band was doing or make them more of a hate click phenomenon. They became proof that aesthetic familiarity could substitute for genuine artistic merit, but only temporarily and only for audiences with no understanding of what they were experiencing a degraded copy of. The band's legacy became even more poisonous when multiple sexual assault allegations surfaced against that vanity guy, cementing their transformation into the scene's answer to Insane Clown Posse, except somehow managing to be worse. If you thought that was impossible, Blood on the Dance Floor proved that rock bottom always has a basement. So, how can we analyze Generation 3's legacy? Well, they represented that rock bottom for the photocopying process. These bands were so far removed from understanding what had made My Chemical Romance special that they were essentially working in a completely different medium. They'd learned the templates instead of studying artistic principles, and most crucially, they had no access to the authentic experiences that had given those templates their power. What united all of these bands was their complete focus on commercial viability over artistic integrity. They'd identified the surface elements that generated audience response and built an entire career around replicating those elements without having any understanding of their original context or purpose. Most problematically, they'd transformed MCR's genuine outsider status into a marketable identity, where My Chemical Romance had offered real community to kids who felt genuinely alienated. A lot of these Generation 3 bands offered the aesthetic of alienation without any understanding of what that alienation actually felt like or meant. By 2015, the photocopying process had degraded the original vision so completely that most of these bands were barely recognizable as being part of the same emo ecosystem that had produced Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge. The scene had moved on, streaming had changed how people discovered music, and a new generation of fans was beginning to discover MCR directly, rather than through these filtered interpretations. In other words, the nostalgia cycle was about to bring everything full circle.